Okay, so let's go ahead and start with page 6. I've been just hand numbering the pages. If you will, you can call this paragraph H that we're now going to get into. And I'm going to hide my note until after we read through the paragraph. So Stace says, we have now collected a number of cases of actions which, in the ordinary usage of the English language, would be called cases in which people have acted of their own free will. We should also say in all these cases that they chose to act as they did. We should also say that they could have chosen otherwise. So here he's saying, and then he says, if they had chosen. So here he's saying something, he's referencing back with respect to the examples, and he's saying whenever people said they were acting of their free will, they seem to be using a definition that implies that they think free will means choosing to act as one does or did, and then the idea that one could have chosen otherwise. For instance, so then he gives an example. If, for instance, Mahatma Gandhi was not compelled to fast, he chose to do so. He could have eaten if he wanted to. When Smith went out to get his lunch, he chose to do so. He could have stayed at home. He could have stayed and done some more work if he wanted to. Okay, so this is going to be quite relevant to the writing task that you're going to be doing. So why don't we go ahead and take note of what's going on? So when you go through your causal history for this write-up, you are going to be thinking like Stace. And I'm going to want you to extract some cause and event chains from your causal history. You're going to extract about 3 or 4. And then for each cause and event that you extract, I want you to decide whether or not the event was one that was done freely according to Stace. And we're going to get to his official definition for free will and not free will, but you can already see that he's getting towards a definition. But what I want you to see right here is how he applies the definition to 2 examples, how thoroughly he does it. Okay, so if these are components of the correct definition for free will, look at how he incorporates the definition. So he says, Mahatma Gandhi was not compelled to fast. He chose to do so. He could have eaten if he wanted to. So in other words, remember, Mahatma Gandhi said, I did do it of my own free will. Okay, so then why might Stace and people who use the word in a common way say that he did? Well, it has to do with their definition. So not compelled to, he chose to do so. He could have eaten if he wanted to. In other words, what? Chose to act as they did. So not compelled to, no one forced me. Chose to, could have acted otherwise. In other words, here's an option, another option that points to him acting otherwise if he wanted to do otherwise. So the stuff that I'm circling here, I hope you can see how these words show a direct linkage back to what looks like a common usage or definition from common usage for free will. When Smith went out to get his lunch, he chose to do so. So here's another example of embedding words to show that you're using a definition for a word. So remember, Smith went out to get his lunch. In one of the examples, that was Smith said he did that of his own free will. Okay, so how can we argue for that given the emerging definition for free will? Well, what does he say? He chose to do so. That's not enough. You got to apply all of the definition in this case. He could have stayed and done some more work. In other words, so here's the choose to do so. And then these words right here are pointing towards the second part of the definition, right? When you're saying, well, here was another option, you're saying what? He could have done otherwise if he wanted to. All right, so the note I have here then is examples of common usage for free will are pointing to elements of a correct definition. And so he pulls from 2 of the examples that he went over through the ordinary conversation captured in his imagined dialogue among different speakers. Okay, so now let's take a look at paragraph I. We have also collected a number of cases of the opposite kind. They are cases in which men were not able to exercise their free will. They had no choice. They were compelled to do as they did. So here are what appear to be emerging elements for a definition for not acting freely, as captured in the dialogues according to Stace. So now he's giving you an example. The man in the desert did not fast of his own free will. Okay, why? All right, so he had no choice. So again, that goes back to that part of the definition in the matter. He was compelled to fast. Well, this says you should, so here it is, right? Compelled, not acting freely has to do with you're compelled. And then, well, why was he compelled? There was nothing for him to eat. So he elaborates on why it was that he was compelled. So he's really trying to flesh out. He doesn't just say, well, I didn't starve just because I was compelled to, but why were you compelled to? Well, there's nothing for you to eat in the desert. So notice how the Stace is working through the definition, using the definition, and elaborating a little bit to explain why a given action is considered free or not free. It ought to be quite easy, Stace goes on to say, by an inspection of these cases to tell what we, again, key term, right, his standard, his criterion for deciding whether a definition is correct or not, when we say that a man did or did not exercise free will. We ought, therefore, really important conclusion. Remember I told you philosophers argue for this stuff, and we've already seen some arguments. I just haven't really focused on saying, here's an argument, but I've been letting you know when there is an argument. But again, look, he's reaching a major conclusion here. He's saying we ought to be able to extract from them the proper definition, so the correct definition of the term. What term? Free will. Let us put the cases in a table. So now he's saying, remember earlier he said, I'm going to use my criterion for deciding correct and incorrect usage of a term. And I'm going to show you by looking at how we use the word through common usage in ordinary conversation. And now he thinks that he has done that. He is able to figure out what is the correct definition. Like I said, he's already pointing to it here, but now he's signaling to us explicitly that that's what's next on his agenda. Okay, guys, so just so you have a sense of where we're at, we have this page, and then this page. Okay, so moving along, as you can see, he has divided up he has created two columns. Those which he considers free acts or unfree acts. You could also say free decisions, unfree decisions, free choices, unfree choices. So Gandhi fasting because he wanted to free India. Okay, so look at that. So you might want to highlight this the same way. I might have you do this for your writing assignment, the next part. I haven't decided yet. I'll have decided by the time you watch the last video for this week. And then compare that to a man fasting in the desert because there was no food. So different reasons for fasting, right? They both have causes, and yet this one's a free act of not eating. This one is not a free act of not eating. Stealing bread because one is hungry. So one stealing, right, and it being a free act, but another instance in which it is claimed that stealing isn't an unfree act, and that is somehow linked to being threatened. Signing a confession because one wanted to tell the truth, in other words, there was a cause there, compared to signing a confession where it was not done freely because someone was beat up physically or was threatened with that. Leaving an office or leaving a space, going out somewhere. Why? What was the cause? Wanting one's lunch versus being forcibly removed. And I think we should highlight these words. Okay, no food means there's a lack, right? Okay, so what does Stace go on to say? Notice that we're on what I'm calling page 7, and we're still on page... I can't do the alphabet anymore. I think we're still in paragraph G or whatever it was that I had labeled last G. I think I skipped from G, and then I go 5, 6. Okay, so 6 H I. Yeah, this is correct. J. So Stace says it is obvious that to find the correct definition, I keep highlighting key concepts of free acts, we must discover what characteristic is common to all the acts in the left column. And what is at the same time absent from the acts in the right column? This characteristic, which all free acts have and which no unfree acts have, will be the defining characteristic of free will. So he's saying, what do all of these have in common that these do not have in common? Whatever this has in common that this set does not, That's what it must mean to act freely. So he goes on to explain. Is being uncaused or not determined by causes the characteristic of which we are in search? So this is very important. Okay, so remember earlier in this lecture, in the first video, he was talking about how some philosophers, say, look, everything is caused. The thesis of universal causation is true for any given event, action, decision, choice, thought, feeling, or desire. We can explain it in terms of cause, and then we can explain those causes in terms of other causes, going infinitely backwards into the past, into time. And so he's now saying, okay, well, if that's what makes, if someone lacking freedom or free will doesn't exist because everything is caused, because metaphysical determinism is true, then, that's one thing. But it seems like we have some examples where people are saying we do act freely, okay? So then he says, it cannot be, because although it is true that all acts in the right-hand column have causes, such as, and so causes, okay, so all of these, very important, guys, write this down. All of these have causes. Okay, we already saw that. Right, all of these events here have causes cited. But so do these. All right, so he says, is being caused or not caused, determined by causes the characteristics of which we're in search? It can't be. All of the free acts have causes, but so do unfree acts. In other words, whether or not metaphysical determinism is true, whether or not the thesis of universal causation is true, that doesn't seem to be what differentiates how we are using free and not free in ordinary common usage. So then he says, so then he gives examples of causes that are given for the free acts. He says, Mr. Gandhi's fasting was caused by his desire to free India. So fasting was the event, right? The action or the choice. And then he's saying desire, the kind of cause that made him fast or, made that event happen, take that action, decision, choice, is the desire to free India. The man leaving his office, so again, an event, action, decision, choice, office by his hunger. In other words, hunger was a what? Cause. Okay. So moreover, there is no reason to doubt that these causes of the free acts were in turn caused by prior conditions, and that these were again the result of causes, and so that go on back indefinitely into the past. Just think about this. You're taking Philosophy 1301 as an online course, right? Well, what were the immediate causes that led to that? What were the most recent causes of that? What caused those causes? How far back in your past, in your causal history, did you go in excavating, the causal chains, right? So any physiologist can tell us we're almost done, a page and a half, the causes of hunger. What caused Mr. Gandhi's tremendously powerful desire to free India is no doubt more difficult to discover. Okay, so it's basically, I think I'm going to do this part later, but basically Gandhi fasted. That was an action. That was an event. What was it caused by? A powerful desire. What was that desire caused by? A goal to free India. Okay, now he's saying basically that desire itself, right, it must have had causes. So this desire or goal to free India, the desire itself, the goal itself had a cause. It must have had a cause, he said. So he gives us examples, like categories of the kinds of causes that might have led to this desire or goal that he has. And as I'm lecturing on this part, I hope you're thinking about your causal history write-up that you did. Maybe you said that you were taking Philosophy 1301 online, and maybe you talked about COVID-19 and what was on the schedule, and what was available. But you also probably talked about why you're even taking a philosophy class. Isn't that related to some kind of desire or goal that you have? Like a degree or professional life or happiness? But then what caused that? What caused the desire itself, right? Those desires that tie in together to to lead to your present reality of taking a philosophy class, much less taking it online. So he's saying the very desire itself is the cause of him fasting, but the desire itself must also have had a cause. Some of them, and by this he means causes, may have lain in the peculiarities of his glands or brain. So maybe there's some kind of physiological, chemical explanation. In other words, neurotransmitters, cells, neural pathways. Others in his past experiences, others in his heredity, so DNA, others in his education, what you learn, no concepts you pick along the way. This should be making you think of Learn Smart, where Lawhead was talking about hard determinism, which I said, unfortunately, he calls determinism, which makes it could lead you to believe that that determinism itself is a theory about free will when it's not. Hard determinism is a theory about free will. In fact, they just asked me, I was just asked by the publisher to consult with them on this book, the very book that we're using for this class. And I was like, yes, because I definitely have some things that I think he needs to change and add to the book. So yay! All right. So if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Okay. So defenders of free will have usually, so he's just saying, look, there's a variety of causes. We might not be able to pinpoint exactly each and every cause of how he came to have this desire to free will, but the causes are going to be of this kind. So maybe you, in thinking about why you're taking Philosophy 1301 online, why you're taking philosophy at all, maybe you talked about past experiences. Maybe there are unknown causes like chemical, neurological reactions in your brain to things. Your DNA, maybe there's something about you that operates a certain way. Education, and of course that could include childhood education, education through lived experience, through other classes. He goes on to say, defenders of free will have usually tended to deny such facts. That is, that you can explain everything in terms of a cause. Defenders of free will. So that's the libertarianism. I don't think I had to read about libertarianism. I have my 16-week class read about it, and I think I have my 10-week class read about it, but not the 8-week class. You might want to look at that. The libertarians think that there are at least some actions or choices or decisions that are not caused in the way that are not necessarily aligned with how people think of metaphysical determinism or the thesis of universal causation. By the way, notice how I'm just using these words like you understand them already, and that's because you already read about this in the Smart Book, but I also clarified the terms in a written lecture that you should have watched before this one. Okay, so he says, but to do so is plainly a case of special pleading. So he says, deniers of metaphysical determinism, that everything has a cause, are engaged in some kind of special pleading, which is unsupported by any scrap of evidence. The only reasonable view is that all human actions, both those which are freely done and those which are not, are either wholly determined by causes or at least as much determined as other events in nature. Okay, and then he says, but whatever degree of determinism prevails in the world, human actions appear to be as much determined as anything else. And if this is so he's teasing out the implications. He's saying, look, if metaphysical determinism is true, right, it cannot be the case that what distinguishes actions freely chosen from those which are not free is that those which are not free, those which are free, the latter, are determined, which are not free are determined by causes while the former are not. Major conclusion right here about free will. And notice that this entire piece that we've been looking at is actually a complex argument. I'm just not breaking it down in terms of sub-conclusions and final conclusions, but we have been looking at some sub-conclusions. Okay, therefore, being uncaused or being undetermined by causes must be an incorrect definition of free will. So remember at the very beginning, he said that some people have defined free will as what? Not being determined by causes, right? He said, look, this is on page 3. This is how some people are defining free will. And he says, actions not wholly determined by causes. He's saying, this is incorrect. That is not the correct definition. Leave that there for right now. But he's basically referring back to that definition in the text here. Therefore, okay, so we've got that part. So conclusion about incorrect definition for free will, which leads him to the following point, guys. We only have 2 more paragraphs or a paragraph to go. All right. So what then is the difference between acts which are freely done and those which are not? What is the characteristic which is present to all the acts in the left column and absent from all those in the right column? So you'll remember he's talking about these. So all of these acts have causes. So being uncaused cannot be the definition of unfree acts, okay? So what is different about these? What does this one have that this one does not have, and vice versa? Okay, so basically, based on this conclusion that, the philosophers and psychologists, or at least some of them, have an incorrect definition of free will, this leads him to some questions at issue in light of said conclusion. So we've already got that right here. What is the characteristic which is present to all aspects in the left column and absent from those in the right column? Is it not obvious that although both sets of actions have causes, so notice, look at all those, this is metaphysics, people, of those in the left-hand column are of a what? A different kind from the causes in the right-hand column. In other words, it's not whether or not an action is caused that makes an action, choice, or decision free or unfree. It's the kind of cause that is the immediate or proximal reason for an action. He goes on to say, so different kinds of causes in each column of example. So it's the kind of cause. You might want to add this here. It's the kind of cause or the way that something that is caused that makes something free or unfree. So he says, the free acts are all caused. I want you to bracket this part. This is going to be so important. Now we're getting to the core concepts that you will be applying. So the free acts are all caused by what? Desires or motives or some internal psychological states of the agent's mind. All of these words are important elements of how he's defining the main concept, free will. The unfree acts, on the other hand, are all caused by, so both of them have causes, right? Physical forces or physical conditions outside of the agent. So, and actually, this is where the definitions are right here. Let me find my highlighter real fast. So here's the definition for free acts, and we're going to actually expand on that in a minute. And then here's the definition for unfree acts. And again, he didn't just say, hey, here's my definition. He's been trying to demonstrate, to convince, to prove to you through common usage, through ordinary language, through ordinary conversation, what a correct definition is. And so he thinks that this is the result of his method. Okay, so he says, he gives an example. Police arrest means physical force exerted from the outside. So notice how he's expanding on how someone is saying, look, oh, this is actually interesting to think about George Floyd, but we're not going to go there because this lecture will be longer than I want it to. But notice how he's elaborating. He's not just saying, when you're arrested by police, you're not free. And he's not just saying being arrested by police means that you have no choice or you're compelled to do so. No, he's saying what? He says a physical force exerted from the outside. The absence of food in the desert is a physical condition of the outside world. So this is very interesting. So notice that he is tying in definitions, right? Look at this. Physical forces, physical conditions outside the agent. That means outside of your mind or brain, your physical body, okay? So look, he says police arrest. So that's an example, okay? Means what? Physical force. Well, isn't that a key word from the definition? Yeah, physical force. Exerted from the what? Outside. Do you see how he embedded definitions, words from the definition into the example to show how the example, to show that what he's talking about here, he's trying to show that arrest, that action, can or is an example of something done of not of one's own free will, okay, or that it takes away from it. And how does he do that? He embeds key words. He connects it to key words in the definition. Another example, the absence of food. So there's an event, experiencing the absence of food, and so therefore not eating that event. How does he use the definition to show that it's not of one's free will? Then again, he says a physical condition from the definition for unfree of the what? Outside world. By outside world, he doesn't necessarily mean like in the desert or in the forest. He just means not originating from within your own mind or thinking, decision-making, consciousness, or bodily organism. So here's the final conclusion. We may therefore, okay, when it comes to the question of whether or not metaphysical determinism is, whether or not freedom or free will is consistent with and hence possible when we assume metaphysical determinism is true, we may therefore frame the following rough definitions, okay? So he's saying, here's my final definition for the key terms that we've been focused on. Acts freely done are those whose immediate causes are psychological states in the agent. Acts not freely done are those whose immediate causes are states external to the agent. I really think that I like this version of his definition here better. I think we could combine these and these right here. But I want to point out one more thing that's really important to make sure that you really understand what he means by his definition for free act. It is plain that if we define free will in this way, then free will certainly exists, and the philosopher's denial of his existence is seen to be what it is, nonsense. We're not going to talk like that in this class. We don't just say nonsense, just to let you know. It's not very civil. For it is obvious, look at how confident he feels. He's using an assurance. That all those actions of men which we should ordinarily attribute to the exercise of their free will, or of which we should say they freely chose to do them, are in fact actions. So again, freely chose, free actions, are actions which have been caused by their own desires, wishes, thoughts, immediate impulses, and psychological states. So in the next part of your writing for this week, you are going to be analyzing your causal history, and you are going to be sorting some of your actions and decisions into free and unfree acts as Stace might. I'm not saying you're going to do a dialogue, but you are going to basically be thinking like Stace. To help you through that part of the writing task, I'm going to create a separate video and some prompts. That will take about 15 more minutes of your time, and then you'll be able to do your writing, your write-up.